Is the US hiding crashed UFOs? Have they even recovered non-human pilots? What all these whistleblower claims are about and what science has to say about them is what we will discuss in detail in this video. I can already tell it's going to be pretty galactic, so be sure to stay tuned until the end, and if you like it, I'm very happy to see a thumbs up and a comment, because that's how we get the YouTube algorithm to show this important topic to even more people. Thanks a lot guys and welcome. In the last few weeks we've seen some headlines that you probably wouldn't have thought possible before. UFO whistleblower in US Congress, finds of non-human objects were covered up, or whistleblower claims before Congress US government owns extraterrestrial spaceships. I think it's fair to say that the very fact that there are now headlines like this is extraordinary, and so it's urgent to take a look at the claims made by this whistleblower, David Grusch. I want to do this piece by piece and then show in each case what the scientific facts are on the respective topic aspect. So this video will be quite long, but I recommend you to watch it until the end, to really have the overview on the subject of the search for extraterrestrial life, because I assume that the UFO topic and media and political will now accompany a little longer. And I'll just sum up my opinion on the whole subject with this meme. I wanted to believe, but then the government said they were real. But let's break this down in some detail. The David Grusch story was actually not the first UFO hype this year. The older among us remember, 5 months ago there was a whole UFO wave over the US. What it had to do with it and what the German spy beer balloon has to do with it, we clarify now. It's not like the news situation has been extraordinary the last few years anyway, and now a UFO invasion. So, if we live in a simulation, the programmer definitely has a sense of humor, you can say that. But what happened anyway? It started with a supposed spy balloon of China, which was sighted over the USA, and according to the American government there secretly should collect information. After this was announced, the balloon was ominously allowed to continue flying for a few days until it was shot down by the American military. Sounds like a silly story to impress voters, but it's not so far-fetched, since this balloon technology can be really high-tech. Balloons sound primitive, but they are a cheaper alternative to satellites, for example, and are much harder to detect. The company Google, which kindly provides this platform here, also had a project called Loon for years, where they were researching so-called high-altitude balloons. So, if the Chinese want to spy on the US, such balance would actually not be the worst means of choice. By the way, the German spy balloon looks like this. So far so strange, but then in the past few days more and more unknown objects appeared in the airspace of the US and Canada and were shot down. Whether there is a connection to the spy balloon is not clear, and in general the whole information situation is very thin. On Twitter the hashtags UFO and aliens have been trending for days, and that's why I felt compelled to produce this video here and bring some light into the darkness. What do we know about these ominous flying objects? The first object was about the size of a car and had probably posed a noticeable threat to civil aviation, because it also flew amazingly high. At about 12,000 meters, the remains had fallen into the sea off Alaska. A day later, the Canadian government then asked the US military again to shoot down a high-flying flying object over Canadian territory. The remains crashed into Canadian territory. The third UFO was then shot down in late July. It was probably traveling at an altitude of 6,000 meters and had an alleged octagonal structure. This is the information that the Pentagon has officially released, so we can assume that this is only an absolute fraction of all known information, and the speculation is boiling over right now, especially after US General Glenn Van Herk was asked if he could at least rule out an alien origin of the object. And he cryptically replied, "I haven't ruled anything out at this point." So, what's going on here? Did Alf finally complete his journey from the planet Melmac to Earth? Or is the US being spied on by ET? First of all, it is super important to note that UFO only means unknown flying object. Many people have with the word, but directly an alien association, and that will have led to the fact that now everywhere is discussed whether an extraterrestrial invasion begins here. And I can give you directly a very clear answer to the question whether aliens are at work here. Does anyone seriously think that it is even remotely realistic that an alien species, which apparently can travel interstellar, i.e. is thousands of years ahead of us, soars across the Earth with some cheap thing and then gets shot down by Joe Biden? So I know it's fun to speculate about aliens and UFOs, but this is just hair-pulling nonsense. And I even find this speculation annoying, and I will also briefly explain why. The search for extraterrestrial life is, after all, a serious part of space exploration. We know that in our Milky Way alone there are several 100 billion stars, many of them with planets, moons and dwarf planets. Besides the Milky Way, there are also hundreds of billions of galaxies, which in turn are home to so many stars and planets. So if you ask yourself the question if there are aliens somewhere there, the answer must be, yes, absolutely. It is incredibly unlikely that, given the vastness of the cosmos, Earth is the only planet on which life has evolved. That's why we're looking for signs of extraterrestrial life. Space telescopes, like James Webb, try to look for molecules in exoplanet atmospheres that might indicate organic processes. With powerful instruments like James Webb, we may also be as close to discovering extraterrestrial signs of life as we have ever been. This is the serious science regarding the search for extraterrestrial life. Talk of UFO sightings, however, does the whole thing a disservice from my point of view. There are certainly aliens, but to get here, they would have to have developed something like warp drive or even for a seemingly impossible faster-than-light propulsion. Such a species would not fly around in flying saucers or balloons or whatever. Not even with devices that we could even remotely recognize as flying objects. The idea that aliens fly around with UFOs is just all too human, and shaped by decades of being bombarded with Hollywood alien movies. But what really bothers me about this is that this cheese will remain in the memory of the average person. 5 years from now, when the subject of aliens comes up, no average person will think of James Webb and exoplanet atmospheres, but of
that thing back then where the Yanks shot down the UFOs, that was typical again.
Who really believes it concerns alien technology, can be led also by governments on the Gladius, which he gives out intentionally only very few information. Do you really think that the Pentagon doesn't already know what the flying objects are about? Just as the Chinese know exactly what the object is that they have now allegedly sighted over their airspace. If it exists at all. And that brings us to the point of what this is probably really about. The whole thing is a political dispute between the US and Canada as aides and China on the other side. That China spies on the USA is of course a fact, just as hopefully the USA spies on China, if they are not completely stupid. Everyone knows that, but now it has just been exposed and now they have to politically just tease each other a bit. At the latest by the fact that now China has allegedly seen such a thing, it is clear what it is all about. Chinese Foreign Office spokesman Wang Wenbin said, "It's pretty clear which country is the leading spy empire in the world." Referring to the US as well, though of course China is not a whit better. This shows that yes, we are simply dealing with a dispute between the US and China. Of course, this will now be dragged through all the media for weeks, and every other object that anyone shoots down, even if it's just a pigeon or something, will then be reported in detail. But seriously, in principle, the thing is pretty lame. But watch out, governments are probably already planning to introduce an alien tax. And, of course, we mustn't forget that military technology is certainly out there. Both of the Americans and the Chinese, of which Otto normal citizen knows nothing. It could be something like that, that is in any case a much more probable tip than alien UFOs. After the spy balloon sightings it became quiet around the topic UFOs. But in June David Grusch made his claim public. American scientist and Air Force veteran David Charles Grusch claims that he has knowledge that the American military possesses extraterrestrial flying machines and is hiding this fact. How does he know this? Because he worked for many years for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the central US agency for military intelligence and also commercial cartographic evaluation and reconnaissance. During that time, he was the head of a research group dedicated to the elucidation of unexplained aerial phenomena. These phenomena are meanwhile summarized by authorities under the generic term UAP, unexplained aerial phenomenon, and there are even NASA research groups dealing with them. So the phenomenon itself is quite real, and there are some sightings where it is not quite clear yet what it is about, mostly recorded by the US military. For UFO followers it is immediately clear, all these sightings must be alien technology. And now this, the cherry on top of the extraterrestrial cream pie. Whistleblower David Grusch confirms that the government is hiding UFOs. He says, it's the recovery of technical vehicles of non-human origin, let's call them spacecraft. Sometimes you even come across dead pilots, and believe it or not, as fantastic as that sounds, it's true. Okay, so in principle we have the Area 51 myth here. The USA are researching dead aliens and have parked the UFO next door in the garage. With such a claim, Grusch really needs good evidence, doesn't he? Surely he has it. Who else would tell such a thing? In the Daily Mail we read, Grusch said he never saw photos of the allegedly recovered spacecraft, but he spoke at length with others who had seen it. The alleged whistleblower only knows the things he reveals himself from third-hand sources and has never seen them himself. There are aliens for sure, but to come here they would have to have developed some kind of warp drive or a faster-than-light drive that seems impossible to us. Such a species would not fly around with flying saucers. Not even with devices, which we could recognize even approximately as a flying object. Let alone with pilots. The idea that aliens fly around with UFOs is simply human. Shaped by decades-long exposure to Hollywood alien movies. It speaks very much for the fact that alien aircrafts would be AI-controlled, if at all. Does this mean that the story is a complete air act? No. As the mathematician Eric Weinstein, whom I hold in high esteem, writes on Twitter, I still have zero hard evidence that this is real at the level of crafts. None. Lots of rumors with no hard evidence backing up any of it. Nothing has changed on that front. It may well be a massive psyop, but it can't be nothing. It has to be huge one way or the other. As you can now see here, a psyop is a targeted disinformation campaign by the government. And that's always possible, of course, if you look at the history books. If the government suddenly wants everyone to talk about alien UFOs, then one should at least become a bit skeptical. So the spectacular thing about this new story is not the absurd claims of David Grusch, who has not seen anything himself, but the extent to which the media and US authorities are taking up the issue. In truth, there is no great UFO wave. There are individual sightings, each with rational explanations. NASA has already cleared up some of them, such as the Go Fast UFO, where a pilot allegedly saw an incredibly fast object racing over the sea. Well, as NASA now analyzed, the object was actually racing for kilometers above the water, and the apparent speed can be completely attributed to the speed of the observing aircraft, which was flying at nearly 700 kilometers per hour. The object itself thus had a speed of only about 60 kilometers per hour. And this corresponds exactly to the wind speed at an altitude of 4 kilometers. So it could have been anything that was simply blown across the sea by the wind. And with this story, the relevant YouTube channels have been making up nonsense about aliens and UFOs for years, and now it just falls apart like that. Then, in my opinion, there should also be some cases that are due to military technology, from the USA or China or whoever, and of which the normal citizen is not supposed to know anything. And under the point of view, it is of course very convenient, for such secret military projects, if people instead talk about aliens and UFOs. But now I would be very interested in your opinion. Do you agree with me that the explanation with alien technology is the most remote one? Or do you see it completely differently? Feel free to write your opinions in the comments and let's try to discuss objectively. That was in June. Since then, a little bit has happened, because David Grusch has testified before an investigative committee of the US Congress, and there he has confirmed his claims under oath. The US federal government has maintained a top-secret UFO research program for decades, and is in possession of extraterrestrial artifacts. He also repeated the thesis about the non-human biomass under oath, saying, "It's not human," and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge of the program that I talked to. It became even more explosive, because he was asked in the committee if he had heard of anyone being killed in the alleged cover-up of this program. And he responded, "I have to be careful in answering that question. I have referred individuals with that knowledge to the proper authorities." So extremely explosive implication. From my point of view, but still the most important point, he did not see any of this himself, but says that colleagues involved told him about it. However, he was denied access to the explosive findings, which is why he filed a whistleblower complaint. And that is also the sticking point with the sworn testimony. Many argue that what he says must be true because he testified under oath. By the way, anyone who has attended a few criminal court hearings knows that an oath is no guarantee that statements are correct. But the main point here is that he only said that other people told him about this project. How is that ever going to be refuted? Now this is a very important point. David Grusch did not testify under oath that the US is in possession of UFOs, and not human biomass. He testified under oath that people told him that. That is an immensely important difference that virtually precludes him from ever being prosecuted for perjury. Otherwise, the point is that we continue to have no circumstantial evidence for the theses other than these statements. But as Carl Sagan said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that is still missing here, therefore we can only approach the matter scientifically. And that we do now times the basis for the scientific consideration about aliens are based on the so-called Drake equation. This may even tell us how many alien species there are in the Milky Way, and why it is extremely unlikely that these aliens have already visited us. Aliens, many people think either of the famous horror movie series or of some green Martians. Some people on Earth also claim that they have seen a UFO, but no one really knows where aliens are and what they might look like. One makes oneself already very long thoughts about the probability of extraterrestrial life. And these thoughts are made not only in the production companies of Hollywood or on ominous YouTube channels, but also by renowned astrophysicists, for example Frank Drake, an American physicist who wanted to approach the matter mathematically and created the Drake equation for this. Let's have a look at the Drake equation. There must be some math aces among you who can solve it without any problems. This is how it looks like, and yes, let's calculate a bit. Joking aside, the problem with the Drake equation lies not in our deficient math knowledge, even if my math knowledge is really very deficient, but in the fact that we do not know the variables that we would need for the solution of the equation. Because Frank Drake has thought, if we have just certain facts about our Milky Way, then we can calculate the probability for extraterrestrial life. That is also true, only they do not have the variables. For example, R stands for the average new formation of stars in the Milky Way. So how many new star systems are actually formed per year? F stands for the number of star systems that also have planets. Because a star system, where only a sun is in the middle, but no planets, there we must also not look for aliens. And N stands for the average number of planets in a star system, because a solar system like ours with 8 planets, the probability for life is much higher than in a star system with 1 planet. But we don't have all these exact numbers about the galaxy. But now a team of researchers from the University of Nottingham in Great Britain has dared to solve the Drake equation with new numbers. The spectacular result, according to it, there are 36 intelligent alien species in the Milky Way, which means we are not alone at all. 36 species are buzzing around out there, and who knows if they are well disposed towards us, if they want to destroy us, but in any case they would be very, very far away. But nevertheless, alone the fact that 36 of these species should exist in the Milky Way, that is already really impressive. The research team solved the Drake equation by taking variables that we can derive from our own Earth. This is called the Copernican principle. The bottom line of the Copernican principle is that we humans on Earth don't have a special place in the cosmos, but that we can assume that our evolution is totally standard and nothing special. Also that it would run on an alien planet perhaps so similarly. The researchers of the University of Nottingham made use of this and filled the Drake equation with these data. For example, they wanted to know how long it lasts until on a planet on the average an intelligent species develops. Let's look at the Earth and see, okay, on Earth it took about 4.5 billion to 5 billion years. Then Homo sapiens came and enriched space with his great developments. That is, we assume that on other planets also lasts about 5 billion years. Then they wanted to know, how long does it take then, until a civilization comes into the radio age, and then we can say now, okay, mankind has begun to use radio only about 100 years ago, and with it just possibly messages into the space sent. If one puts these numbers, one after the Copernican principle, into the Drake equation and takes for the other variables evenly the current state of the knowledge, for example evenly how one estimates the height of the star formation rate of the Milky Way and how many stars have planets and puts this also, then one comes evenly to the result, 36 alien civilization is the most probable number. Now one could ask, okay, where are the aliens then? Why don't you talk to us? There the researchers have also an answer on it and say, the next alien civilization would be in approximately 17,000 light-years far away. That is, their messages would need also very, very long to us. Since these alien civilizations are also not yet so long in the modern age, thus in the radio age so to speak, their messages could not have arrived yet at all with us. That means that we have not heard anything from the aliens yet. That does not exclude their existence at all. One aspect that was highlighted in this study that I personally found particularly interesting is that it was said that it is very important for us to detect alien civilization. Because if we were to find that there are no other civilizations in the entire galaxy, it would still be very likely that there once were. The fact that they don't exist now doesn't bode well for our own civilization either. That could imply that also mankind will perish sometime, like the alien species completely elsewhere in the Milky Way. If we find again many alien civilizations, which exist also already very long, then that means for us that we have perhaps still some millennia or 10,000 years before us. What do you think of this study? Do you believe that there are really 36 alien civilizations in the Milky Way? Or do you say no, this is total nonsense? Aliens do not exist. Write it to me in the comments. So there is an immense amount of evidence that there are aliens. But by the Drake equation, we see also that intelligent civilizations should be so sparsely sown that they should be incredibly far away from us. That there are UFO parts on the Earth is very remote, and this is crystal clear. The assertion of David Grusch, the USA would possess flying object parts. Not interdimensional space-time quanta or what I know, but physically existing parts of a flying object. Why this, if it were improbably true, could very well mean doom for our planet, we now look at, by devoting ourselves to the Fermi paradox. This describes the general paradoxical situation that, given the size of the cosmos, there must be aliens, but we detect no sign of them. And a particularly disturbing answer to the Fermi paradox is the dark forest theory. This implies that if aliens had really reached us, our Earth would have been destroyed long ago. It is quite strange, if you look at our galaxy, the Milky Way, because most researchers think that there are about 200 billion star systems in the Milky Way, each of which probably has 1 or 2 planets on average, which means they talk about at least 400 billion planets in the Milky Way. I think you agree with me when I say that the probability for extraterrestrial life on one of these planets is relatively high. But on the other hand, we have no evidence of extraterrestrial life yet. We have never made contact with aliens, and that is quite strange. This circumstance, that there should be probably aliens, but we simply cannot find them, this is the so-called Fermi paradoxon. A very disturbing solution to the Fermi paradox is offered by the so-called dark forest theory, which basically says that there are alien species all over the galaxy, and they are also intelligent and spacefaring, but they are hiding. Why are they hiding? Out of fear. The idea behind it comes from the great science fiction novel, The Dark Forest, by the Chinese science fiction author Liu Kaixin, and I'll read you how he describes it in the book, because you get a pretty good picture of this dark forest theory. He says the universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is an armed hunter, stalking through the trees like a ghost, carefully pushing aside branches that block the way and trying to tread silently. Even breathing is done with care. The hunter must be careful because everywhere in the forest are stealthy hunters like him. If he discovers another life, another hunter, an angel or a demon, a tender infant or a dry old man, a fairy or a demigod, he can do only one thing: open fire and eliminate the enemy. This is of course very poetically described, but in principle it is about the following idea. For a space species that has managed to travel interstellar, it is never quite clear what other civilizations could have for intentions. They could be hostile, that is the safest, so to be on the safe side, it makes sense to simply wipe out these other civilizations preemptively. Imagine the following: one species was the first in the Milky Way to invent interstellar travel. Someone has to be the first, and this species had such a technological advantage that since then it roams the galaxy like a hunter, and searches for other intelligent species that are not quite like that yet. in order to then use the technological advantage to wipe out this species. Thus, the advanced alien species ensures that no other species can ever become dangerous to it and it can dominate the galaxy forever. And how do you find other intelligent species to wipe out? By paying attention to whether they make themselves noticeable. That is, whether they make thoughtless sounds on their planet, and the best way to determine that is through signals like radio waves. That is, as soon as a species enters the modern age, it will probably invent radio signals, as we did, and send them out into space. Any radio signal from the Earth will be sent out into space, and as soon as someone catches onto that radio signal because, aha, there's an intelligent species, in a few hundred years, they'll be able to travel interstellar. We're going to crush them. Short excursion, the San Marino Scale 1 has tried to classify scientifically how dangerous certain measures can be in view of an alien attack, and namely in the so-called San Marino scale. This was developed in 2005 in the dwarf state of San Marino and goes from 1 to 10. So if you eat cereal in the morning, that is probably very safe for an alien invasion. That would probably be an A on the San Marino scale. Unless the aliens hate cereal. But if we sent a message into space with our coordinates and a request to come and destroy us, that would be a 10 on the scale. Now you understand surely also why the whole is called the dark forest theory. Because it would mean for intelligent species, if they suspect it, like we for example we have recognized the possibility to be extinguished, that they remain quiet as a mouse and send no signals into the space. Because exactly that could lead to the annihilation of the own species, because one makes thereby these hunter alien species on itself attentive. So you really have to cower quiet as a mouse on the planet, like in the forest, hide behind a tree and pray that the hunter doesn't find you. Now you'll say, okay, that's just an idea from a science fiction novel, it's nonsense. But there are also famous researchers who think that this is quite probable. David Brin, for example, is also a science fiction author, but also a physics professor, so he's really not a blank slate. He says, it is actually a very plausible explanation for it, and it makes it also possible for us not to fiddle around further, for example at the Drake equation, in order to find out the variables evenly, then in such a way that it can be explained that we find no aliens in the space. He says, there is no need to forcefully modify the elements of the Drake equation to explain the great silence in the cosmos. Nor do we need to argue that aliens would balk at the cost of interstellar travel. All it takes is for an alien species to become intelligent enough for the results of this scenario to become the equilibrium state in the galaxy. We would not have detected any alien radio traffic, nor would any aliens ever have settled on Earth, because they were all killed shortly after sending out radio signals. So maybe there really is a mean alien species grazing the galaxy and killing adversaries. Absolutely possible, could be. And we've already drawn attention to ourselves, unfortunately. The first radio signal was sent in the early 20th century. That is, not that long ago. Radio signals travel at the speed of light, which means that if it was sent out for the first time a little more than 100 years ago, and since then several signals have continued to emanate steadily from the Earth, we can say that they have already spread within a radius of about 100 light years. So we can only hope that in this radius no aliens have perceived us yet. But the further they expand, the greater the danger that hostile aliens will become aware of us and want to destroy us. So what is the best advice for us humans? Should we preventively stop sending radio signals into space and just hide in the dark forest, and make ourselves completely invisible with our planet? Or should we say that is so improbable, we continue to send radio signals into the space? It is really difficult. One speaks with such events of so-called black swans. Swan stands for sleep well at night. A black swan is then the opposite, which is an unlikely event, but which is absolutely catastrophic. And if this dark forest theory is true and the aliens would be on the way to us, then that is an absolute black swan. Another small digression, this whole problem is related to the so-called prisoner's dilemma, which is a well-known thought experiment from game theory. There are two prisoners who have committed a crime together, they are now in prison and they cannot communicate with each other. But they have several options. If both prisoners confess, then they get a relatively high sentence. However, not the maximum sentence, since they confessed. If both do not confess, then both get only a minimal punishment for another crime, but for the main crime, they cannot be convicted then. However, if only one incriminates the other, then he will go out without punishment as a state witness and the other will get the maximum penalty. Those are the options, but they can't communicate with each other, so they don't know exactly what to do. And it's a bit like that with us and the aliens. We're sitting here on our planet, We have no way of gaining information about this theory and about the rest of the Milky Way, which means we really have to decide for ourselves, should we send the signals out into space or should we leave it alone? Quite a difficult decision. What is your opinion? Do you think it is likely that there is something to the dark wall theory? Are we in danger of being killed by aliens if we continue to make ourselves known, or do you think it's absolute nonsense? Feel free to write me in the comments. Let us now turn to the biomass claim of David Grusch. He says that someone told him that the USA had found biological mass of non-human origin in the UFOs. To this I would like to say first of all that the majority of the biological mass on our planet is not of human origin. So, for example, if at that time the Soviets have shot dogs into the space and one would find afterwards remains of a crashed Russian dog, then these would be also not human biological remains which have crashed from the space on the Earth. From this point of view it is not so spectacular as it sounds at first. That on the other hand really alien biomass had been found it after everything what we have just heard, absolutely improbably. Even if there would be a way to bridge thousands of light years, then hardly with pilots in the cockpit, which then crash. Quite apart from that, science has a lot to say about the biology of aliens. Let's have a look at the facts. Any stupid boy can crush a beetle, but all the professors in the world can't make one, said philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. I'm sorry that I'm directly qualying you with highfalutin philosophy, but I think that this quote expresses very well that we still don't really know what life is. I mean, I'm sure I'm alive and so are you. Probably. Anyway, life is a fascinating phenomenon that exists on Earth in numerous forms, but what defines life? In general, it includes the ability to develop, grow, reproduce, and respond to external stimuli. Viruses, for example, are therefore denied the property of being living beings because they cannot reproduce independently.
That is discrimination. Down with the virus phobia.
Life is based on a complex biochemical foundation consisting of a multitude of molecules, and among these molecules, carbon takes the most important role. You can say carbon is the basic element of life on Earth. Without carbon you would not exist. And also no other living being on this beautiful planet. This is due to its special properties and sorry, now we have to refresh some knowledge from chemistry lessons in school. Carbon's ability to form so-called strong covalent bonds and form stable molecules makes it ideal for the complexity and diversity of biochemical processes. Carbon can, in fact, form up to 4 chemical bonds and forms the basic structure of organic molecules including DNA, proteins, and carbohydrates, and these molecules are absolutely critical to the functioning of cells and the structure of the entire organism. But now I can already hear some of you screaming,
Carbon or no carbon, the most important thing for life is water.
Water is of course another absolutely essential component of earthly life. Water is a very good solvent and therefore plays a major role in biochemical reactions. For example, it enables the transport of molecules and the maintenance of cells. In addition, water enables the formation of hydrogen bonds, which are of great importance for the structure and stability of biological molecules, so that should be reason enough to always stay hydrated, folks. By the way, this video is not sponsored by the water lobby, unfortunately. Although carbon is the predominant element of life on Earth, other elements play an important role. Oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and many other elements are indispensable in various biochemical processes, because they form the basis for energy balance and metabolism in living organisms, but the basis is carbon. The big question now is, was this a coincidence? Is it a purely terrestrial development or is life probably carbon-based everywhere in the universe? Since we haven't found any extraterrestrial life yet and only have ourselves as an object of study, you can let your imagination run wild here. Especially from sci-fi movies and novels, we know the idea that life could also be silicon-based. For example, the Exogorth from Star Wars Episode 5. And also the creepy xenomorphs from the Alien series are silicon-based life forms. But why silicon in particular? I explained to you, at which I pointed out to you again that you can help me very much with a thumbs up for the video. So everybody hit the like button. Silicon has some chemical similarities to carbon, and is therefore often considered a promising candidate for an alternative biochemical base. But how realistic is the idea of silicon-based life? Is there really a xenomorph running around somewhere on the exoplanet? Maybe, because silicon is a chemical element located just below carbon on the periodic table. Like carbon, it can enter up to 4 bonds and form complex molecules, and silicon compounds like silicates occur in nature in large quantities and form the bulk of rocks and minerals on Earth, and probably on most exoplanets as well. So that already speaks for the fact that statistically the probability is not small that life could develop on silicon basis. But now comes a big but. A small problem lies in the stability of the chemical bonds. While carbon bonds are relatively easy to break and form again, silicon bonds are very stable and difficult to break. This would limit the flexibility and dynamics of the biochemical processes that are essential for life. This could mean, for example, that silicon life is very inflexible and evolutionary processes could only happen at an absolute snail's pace. This in turn makes it unlikely that an intelligent extraterrestrial species, which for all we know must have undergone a long evolution, would be based on silicon. In addition, there are only limited possibilities for silicon to interact with a solvent. Water, which is used on Earth as a solvent for biochemical reactions, could not be used in a silicon-based biochemistry in the same way. It would not work. But as an alternative, liquid methane, for example, could work. And as we know from our own solar system, that exists on alien celestial bodies. Saturn and Titan are littered with lakes and oceans of methane. So if at some point we study Titan more closely and find life forms there, it will be super interesting to see if they might be silicon-based and use methane as a solvent. Of course, that would be a very, very strong indication that this has happened everywhere else in the cosmos. So the existence of silicon-based life in our universe is possible. But it needs very special conditions just like on Titan. So rather cold places with dense atmosphere and liquid methane and probably such alien silicon life would be a bit primitive, due to lack of fast flexible evolution. But why actually stop at silicon? Maybe there are pizza-based life forms, like me. The universe is gigantic. We are talking about at least several 100 billion planets in our Milky Way alone. So, why shouldn't there be alternative systems based on elements other than carbon or silicon? We already had some elements that could potentially play a role in extraterrestrial life: oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, phosphorus and sulfur, for example. These elements are, after all, widespread on Earth and, while not the basis of life, do play an important role. I mean, try to remove the oxygen in your home, you'll quickly find out. What about nitrogen-based life, for example? Nitrogen is a versatile element and can form stable compounds. Nitrogen compounds such as ammonia could serve as solvents much like water does for carbon-based life. And there is actually evidence that certain microorganisms on our planet can exist in nitrogen-rich environments. It's a bit doubtful that nitrogen-based life would be able to match the complexity and diversity of life on Earth, but primitive nitrogen-based alien life forms on some ammonia-flooded exoplanet, why not? And the game can be played with a great many more elements. Phosphorus-based life is theoretically possible. Boron, sulfur, arsenic, and even metals like iron could form alternative biochemical bases. We simply don't know, since we only know life from Earth, and a statistic with only one comparator is, sort of, well, not meaningful. We can only start from the chemical bases, and they tell us that life can theoretically be based on a variety of bases. However, our current methods and techniques for detecting extraterrestrial life are primarily focused on carbon-based life. And the question is, if we don't block the possibility to find extraterrestrial life. And the question is, if we don't block the possibility to find extraterrestrial life. I would be very interested in your opinion. Is carbon-based life the standard in the universe? So are aliens mostly built like us, or is this an extremely geocentric perspective and life exists in all forms in the universe? I hope we can get an exciting discussion going. From my point of view, the aspect with the not-human biomass is at the latest the point where one would have to say that Grusch's theses are not based in the reality. Does that mean that it never makes sense to search for extraterrestrial objects on Earth? Not necessarily, and there are interesting projects. For example, Harvard professor Avi Loeb's search for an interstellar object that has hit Earth. Spoiler, he claims he found it at the bottom of the ocean. Here comes the original footage. An interstellar object has hit Earth, north of Papua New Guinea in the Pacific Ocean. Interstellar, realize what that means: an object that didn't come from our solar system, but from another place, another star system in the Milky Way, an object that traveled light years, then entered the solar system, and then was on a confrontation course with Earth. Wow, something like that always makes me wonder how anyone could not be interested in astronomy. Write me if you also have this one friend who just partout doesn't understand why the subject is so incredibly fascinating. Anyway, it's object called IM-1, so either way it's something special. Even if it's just a meteorite, a rock, it's an incredible coincidence that the object has traveled light years and then lands on Earth in the Pacific Ocean. Some of you will object now rightly.
How do you know this thing is interstellar, dude?
Good question. We know this because of the speed and angle of entry of the object. The impact was detected by NASA's Center for Near-Earth Object Studies, which tracks extraterrestrial impacts with a network of sensors around the world. And that's how we know it was traveling at just under 45 kilometers per second relative to Earth, and as fast as 60 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. Much faster than normal asteroids within the solar system. Where does that speed come from? Amir Siraj of Harvard University, who debunked the 2019 object as interstellar based on the data, says, probably was created in another star system, ejected from its planetary system, and thus accidentally arrived in our solar system, where it collided with Earth. So we have an object from another part of the galaxy, maybe even the broken-off piece of an exoplanet. In any case, something incredibly rare, because it doesn't happen that often that interstellar objects enter the solar system. The best known so far was Oumuamua, the elongated hydrogen comet which, however, did not land on Earth and is now again super far away from us. So with IM-1 we have an Oumuamua that has hit the Earth. There one should look nevertheless absolutely times or. And exactly he has just mentioned Amir Siraj together with his professor Avi Loeb. Loeb is already well known as a representative of the theory that Oumuamua is alien technology, and he is just as convinced that IM-1 has something to do with extraterrestrials, and that's why he has launched a large-scale search operation to discover the fragments of the object at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Loeb comments, "This has been the most exciting experience of my scientific career. It provides a unique opportunity to learn more about other technological civilizations in the cosmos by exploring the Pacific Ocean." The project is financed by donations, including from the founder of the cryptocurrency Cardano, Charles Hosen, who is also on board the Silver Star ship. It all sounds a bit cocky and rather like a bad Hollywood movie. But what can we say? Now Avi Loeb's team has announced that they have found the remains of the interstellar visitor at the bottom of the ocean. Here you can see the pictures. We see metal beads about 0.5 millimeter in size. The researchers found them with a magnetic sled installed on the ship, which scanned the ocean floor for metallic fragments and a kind of material sieve that can filter out objects of particular interest. But what is the evidence at all that these beads are parts of IM-1? Couldn't they also have another origin? First of all, it is known that during such an impact, the heat and friction in the atmosphere can produce such metallic spheres. Avi Loeb himself had actually described the finding in his blog just a few days ago. Where are the spheres of IM-1? One looked, thus exactly for such a thing, that fits perfectly. In addition, the composition of the spheres seems to be very curious. A first analysis of the composition showed that they mostly consist of iron with traces of magnesium and titanium and contain no nickel. Loeb, in a blog post about the discovery, calls this combination anomalous compared to man-made alloys, known asteroids, unfamiliar astrophysical sources. So in other words, this composition could indicate a very exotic origin. One of the spheres was probably even engraved in a very small way, made in Melmac. The team now wants to find more spheres to get a good sample size for further analysis. Loeb says, "We are now on our way back to the crash site of IM-1 to recover as many spheres as possible. With a large enough sample, we can get a gamma spectrum that characterizes its radioactive elements and possibly date the sample." Along the way, the team also found steel shards and a strange wire made of manganese platinum. This will all then be analyzed in the lab in the following months, so hopefully we'll learn more. Well, what to make of this find now? Personally, I have always been skeptical about Loeb's thesis on Oumuamua, because there are much better scientific explanations that explain how the properties of Oumuamua can be explained naturally. without alien technology. I feel like Lub got a little carried away there, but I admire his commitment to the subject immensely. And this recovery operation in the Pacific is really a fantastic scientific mission that will take us forward one way or another. Such a conviction and such a spirit of discovery, according to the motto, somewhere at the bottom of the gigantic ocean lies perhaps a steel ball, and we will find it. I think that's cool, I have to say that honestly. So I am a fan of this mission, but I am not convinced that this bead is really fragments of IM-1. To call a search for mini pieces of a meteorite that hit 9 years ago in a huge area of the Pacific Ocean a search for a needle in a haystack is already too optimistic, and only because the material of the ball is metallic and has a special composition. It is not yet said 100% that I am dealing here with the material of the meteorite or even alien material, because that is the actual thesis of Lub. Not only one would have found the interstellar asteroid, but evenly by the material also indications that it could be alien technology. The globules could be also of natural origin and have formed perhaps by volcanic processes. They could be of human origin, because who knows how long the stuff has been lying around there. The corner in Papua New Guinea was an important theatre of war during World War II, with lots of shipping traffic. These are all explanations, which seem to me once again more probable than the fantastic theses of AVI Lub. I would wish very much that he is right, alone I lack the faith. After all this, one question remains, why should David Grusch then tell all this if it is not true at all? Why should he lie? I don't think he is lying. Lying implies intent. I do think it's possible that people have told him certain things and that he really believes it, but that simply doesn't make it true. The explanation for the whole story can be broken down very well, and Peter Steinlechen put it wonderfully in an article on golem.de. Kurtz Grusch is presumably convinced to have told the truth. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that the US has actually found aliens. There are all too many other explanations, and the most likely one in my opinion is with the aliens the Pentagon, or whoever wants to distract from other very earthly issues. And Seth Shostak, the senior astronomer at the SETI Institute, so someone with a clue, says, where's the evidence? They are missing. Neither Grusch, nor anyone else who claims to have known about the government's secret UAP program has ever been able to produce publicly convincing photos showing alien devices scattered across the landscape. So conclusion, to believe the Grusch story unconditionally, proves from my point of view just no critical thinking, but it speaks much for the fact that one can be put on a bear by the Pentagon. Scientifically seen likewise very little speaks for it. But how will we find aliens then? Answer, with the science. I think it is very possible that the James Webb Telescope could soon provide us with tangible evidence of extraterrestrial biology. Find out why now. Many were so a bit disappointed when the first published images of extraterrestrial life showed nothing. Then there were some reports claiming that James Webb was not able to detect life on exoplanets. All nonsense. I have very good news for you. We will probably be able to detect extraterrestrial life with the James Webb Telescope. The building blocks for life are distributed everywhere in space. Just a reminder, our galaxy alone holds, according to many astronomers, and 300 million potential life-friendly exoplanets. Even within our galactic neighborhood, there are some candidates for habitable exo-Earths. And only recently, material from which planets form there was found in a fledgling solar system, prebiotic molecules, the basic building blocks for life. The indications speak thus a clear language. Given the sheer size of our galaxy, there must be extraterrestrial life somewhere. All we have to do is discover it, piece of cake, right? Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple, because so far even the very best telescopes have been more poor at finding out details about the atmospheres of exoplanets. But it is precisely in these exoatmospheres that the key to the search for extraterrestrial life lies. Because if a planet harbors life, like Earth, then the effects of this life should be detectable as a so-called biosignature in the atmosphere. And by effects of life I mean, for example, farting alien cows. If anyone asks you tonight what she did today, you can now say I learned about farting alien cows. Anyway, astronomers have developed an ingenious way to find such biosignatures. They don't study the exoplanet directly, but the light from its star. Starlight that has interacted with the exoplanet's surface or atmosphere, and then falls into a terrestrial telescope light years later may contain clues to biosignatures. When light bounces off the surface of a material or penetrates a gas, as it did just now in the exoatmospheres, certain wavelengths of light are more likely to get trapped in the surface of the gas or material than others. This selective trapping of light waves and the different light that then arrives in our eyes is the reason for the different colors of objects. Let's take a simple example. Leaves are usually green because the chlorophyll they contain is particularly good at absorbing light in the red and blue wavelengths. When light hits a leaf, the red and blue wavelengths are absorbed so that mainly green light is reflected back to the eyes. But note, this explanation does not say that your light waves become more attractive under alcohol. This method can be used to detect the presence of certain atmospheric gases associated with life, such as oxygen or methane, because these gases leave very specific signatures in the light. So far so good. But for this to work optimally, you need an extremely powerful telescope, and that's where James Webb comes in. One of James Webb's first official acts was to analyze the atmosphere of exojupiter WASP 96b. This was somewhat lost in the publication of the first images, because it was not an image in the classical sense, but an atmospheric analysis. The spectrum showed the presence of water and clouds, so in principle a super spectacular find, but it is rather unlikely that a gas planet as large and hot as WASP 96b would harbor life. However, these data show that James Webb is absolutely capable of detecting faint chemical signatures in the light of exoplanets. And now comes some really exciting news. In the coming months, James Webb will turn his mirrors on TRAPPIST-1e, a potentially habitable planet the size of Earth that is only 39 light-years from Earth. The TRAPPIST system is perhaps the most promising site for extraterrestrial life that we know of. It directly contains 7 Earth-like exoplanets, and if James Webb takes a closer look here, I think it's the greatest opportunity for the discovery of extraterrestrial life ever in human history. So there's very good reason to be excited, folks. So some of the most realistic depictions of aliens that we've seen on TV and in the movies may soon become a reality.
Morning.
Morning.
James Webb is so powerful, in fact, that it may even be able to extract information not only about the atmospheres of exoplanets, but even about their surfaces. On Earth, for example, the chlorophyll and other pigments that plants and algae use for photosynthesis capture certain wavelengths of light. These pigments produce characteristic colors that can be detected primarily with the help of a sensitive infrared camera, and as luck would have it, James Webb is an infrared space telescope. So if this color were seen reflected from the surface of a distant planet, it would be a possible indication of the presence of alien chlorophyll. But not to let the euphoria become too big now also a small downer. James Webb is not omnipotent. It can search for biosignatures as discussed, examining planets as they pass their stars, and capturing starlight filtered through the planet's atmosphere. In special cases, it may even be able to extract information about the surface. James Webb was not designed primarily to search for life, however, so the telescope can only scrutinize the closer potentially habitable worlds. It can also only detect changes in atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor. Certain combination of these gases can absolutely indicate life, but James Webb is unable to detect the presence of unbound oxygen, which would be the strongest signal for life. But that's just for completeness. I think we have the most capable machine yet to find life in our galactic neighborhood. And if that should succeed, if there should be life in our part of the Milky Way, then that can really only mean that life is not rare in the cosmos and that is teeming with alien life forms among all the stars and planets. Chris Impey and Daniel Appiah, 2 American astronomy professors who also see immense potential in the James Webb Telescope in the search for life, write on the subject. The next generation of exoplanet exploration has the potential to raise the bar for the extraordinary evidence needed to prove the existence of life. The first data from the James Webb Space Telescope give us a glimpse of the exciting advances that will soon be upon us. So now we are really absolute alien experts, and I would be happy if you now help me to promote my channel to extraterrestrial level, because from the YouTube statistics I know that over half of the viewers of my videos have not subscribed. This is absolutely free, helps me immensely, and you no longer miss galactic videos, so people all times diligently press the subscribe button. Be sure to check out the other videos, and if you want to support the channel, visit the online store as always. There you will find the t-shirts from the videos and cute plush planets. Otherwise I would say, see you in the next video. Take care guys.